The year is 793. A monk stands at the edge of a cliff on Lindisfarne Island, staring at the horizon. His hands are shaking, not from the cold, from what he sees coming across the water. Ships, dozens of them, black sails against a gray sky, dragon heads carved into the wood, mouths open like they're screaming. The monk whispers a prayer, but prayers won't save him today. Men pour out of those ships like a flood, axes, swords, shields painted with symbols no one in England has ever seen before. They don't speak, they just run, straight toward the monastery, the holiest place in all of Britain. The monk turns to run, but it's too late. What happens next will change the world forever. This is the story of the Vikings, but not the story you think you know. Not the horned helmets, not the Hollywood myths. This is the real story, the one they don't teach you in school, the one that will make your blood run cold. Because what started on that island in 793 ended with the complete destruction of 4 kingdoms, the death of kings, the burning of cities, and an army so brutal, so unstoppable, that historians called it the Great Heathen Army. You're not ready for this part. Let's go back to that day, June 8, 793, Lindisfarne Island, off the coast of northern England. It's a small island, quiet, peaceful, home to one of the most important monasteries in Europe. Monks live there. They pray, they write, they study. They're unarmed. They've never needed weapons because everyone respects the church, everyone follows the rules, or so they thought. The Vikings don't care about rules. They come from the north, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, places where the cold bites through your bones, where the winters are so dark the sun barely rises, where survival means being harder than anyone else. These men have been sailing for days, maybe weeks. They're hungry, they're angry, and they've heard stories about Lindisfarne. Stories about gold, silver, treasures beyond imagination, all sitting in a monastery, unguarded, just waiting to be taken. The monks never stood a chance. The Vikings hit the beach running. They don't hesitate. They don't negotiate. They storm through the monastery gates like a hurricane. Axes swing. Doors shatter. Monks try to run. Some try to fight back with nothing but their hands. It doesn't matter. Within minutes, the monastery is chaos, blood on the stone floors, smoke in the air, treasures ripped from the walls, gold crosses, silver chalices, ancient books with pages covered in gold leaf. The Vikings grab everything. They load it onto their ships. But here's the part that shocked medieval Europe. They didn't just steal, they destroyed. They set fire to the buildings, they smashed the altars, they threw the holy books into the sea. To the Christians of Europe, this was unthinkable. This wasn't just robbery, this was sacrilege, this was evil. But to the Vikings, this was just Tuesday. Now here's what they never told you. The raid on Lindisfarne wasn't random. It was a test. The Vikings were checking to see if England would fight back, if the kings would respond, if anyone would stop them. And you know what happened? Nothing. No army came, no revenge, no justice. England just let it happen. And that's when the Vikings realized something terrifying. England was weak, divided, ripe for the taking. What happens next will make you speechless. Not just to Lindisfarne, everywhere. Coastal towns, trading posts, monasteries, villages, anywhere with something worth stealing. They'd appear out of nowhere, attack at dawn, take everything, and vanish before anyone could respond. The English called them pagans, heathens, demons from the sea, because they didn't understand them. The Vikings didn't worship the Christian God. They worshipped Thor, Odin, Freya, gods of war and thunder and the sea, and they believed that dying in battle was the greatest honor, that warriors who died fighting would go to Valhalla, a hall where they'd feast and fight forever. So they didn't fear death, they welcomed it. That made them the most dangerous enemy Europe had ever seen. You can't negotiate with someone who wants to die in glory. You can't scare someone who believes the gods are on their side. But the raids were just the beginning. In 865, everything changed. Picture this. It's autumn 865. A massive fleet arrives on the coast of East Anglia. Not dozen ships, not 20, hundreds, maybe thousands, carrying the largest Viking force anyone had ever seen. Historians would later call it the Great Heathen Army, but that name doesn't do it justice. This wasn't just an army. This was a nation on the move. Warriors, blacksmiths, traders, families. They brought weapons, horses, supplies for months because they weren't coming to raid. They were coming to conquer, to take England, all of it. Leading them were three brothers, Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarson, Ubba, sons of the legendary Viking king Ragnar Lothbrok, and they were here for revenge. See, a few years earlier, their father had been captured by King Alla of Northumbria. Ragnar was thrown into a pit of snakes, left to die slowly, painfully. As the venom burned through his veins, Ragnar supposedly laughed. He sang songs about his victories, about his sons, and with his last breath, he said, "How the little pigs would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers." He was calling his sons pigs, saying they'd squeal with rage when they found out how he died. He was right. Ivar and his brothers didn't just want revenge, they wanted to make an example. They wanted every king in England to know, you don't kill a Viking king and walk away. The Great Heathen Army moved through England like a plague. First, they hit East Anglia. The local king, Edmund, tried to negotiate. He offered them gold, land, anything to make them leave. The Vikings took the gold, and then they killed him anyway. Not just killed, they tortured him, shot him with arrows until he looked like a pincushion. Then they cut his head off and stuck it on a pike, a warning. This is what happens when you stand in our way. Next, they marched north to Northumbria, to King Alla, the man who killed their father. Alla gathered his forces. He had thousands of soldiers, home field advantage, fortified cities. He thought he could win. He was wrong. The Vikings didn't fight like European armies. They didn't line up in neat rows. They didn't follow the rules of warfare. They hit fast. They hit hard. They used fear as a weapon. Within minutes, Northumbria fell. King Alla was captured, and what the Vikings did to him next, it became the stuff of legends and nightmares. The Vikings had a special execution method, reserved only for their worst enemies. It was called the Blood Eagle, and it was designed to be the most painful death imaginable. Here's how it worked. The victim was tied face down, their back was cut open, the ribs were broken and spread apart like wings, and then, while they were still alive, the lungs were pulled out. The victim would gasp for air, choking, dying slowly while everyone watched. This is what they did to King Alla, to avenge their father, to send a message. Historians still debate whether this really happened. Some say it's just a myth, a story the Vikings told to scare people. But whether it happened or not, everyone in England believed it did. And that fear, that was just as powerful as the act itself. With Northumbria destroyed, the Great Heathen Army kept moving, south, to Mercia, to Wessex. One by one the kingdoms of England fell. Kings were killed, cities were burned, entire populations were enslaved or massacred. The Vikings were unstoppable. They had better tactics, better weapons, and something the English didn't have: unity. See, England wasn't one country back then. It was 4 separate kingdoms: Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Wessex. And they hated each other. They fought over borders, over resources, over pride. So when the Vikings came, they couldn't work together. Each kingdom tried to fight alone, and each kingdom fell alone. By 870, only one kingdom remained, Wessex, and it was barely hanging on. The Vikings had conquered half of England. They now controlled the area called the Danelaw, their laws, their customs, their language. Even today, hundreds of English words come from Old Norse: sky, egg, knife, they, are. Thousands of English place names come from Vikings. Any town ending in B, that's Viking. Thorpe, Viking. Thwaite, Viking. The Vikings literally changed the English language, the English culture, the English bloodline. So who really won? The English who saved their kingdom, or the Vikings who became part of it? The Viking Age didn't end with Alfred. It continued for another 200 years. More raids, more invasions, more kings. In 1066, the last Viking invasion happened. King Harald Hardrada of Norway tried to take England. He was killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. 3 weeks later, William the Conqueror invaded from Normandy. And guess what? William was descended from Vikings too. Normans literally means Northmen. Vikings. So even after the Viking Age ended, a Viking king still conquered England. The age of raids was over, but the Vikings never really left. They're still there, in the language, in the culture, in the DNA of millions of people. Today, we romanticize Vikings. We put them in movies and TV shows. We dress up as them at Halloween. We wear their symbols on t-shirts. But we forget what they really were: conquerors, invaders, warriors who burned churches and enslaved populations. They weren't heroes. They weren't villains either. They were survivors, people who lived in a brutal world and did brutal things to survive. And here's why this story matters today. It shows us that history isn't black and white. The Vikings destroyed kingdoms, but they also built new ones. They brought terror, but also trade, innovation, new ideas. They were complex, just like us. And the empires they destroyed, they weren't innocent either. England had its own history of conquest and violence. Everyone was fighting. Everyone was trying to survive. The Vikings were just better at it. Here's what you need to understand. The raid on Lindisfarne in 793 wasn't just an attack, it was the beginning of a new era. An era where the old rules didn't apply, where the weak were conquered, where fear was a weapon, and where a group of warriors from the frozen north changed the world forever. The Great Heathen Army didn't just invade England, they invaded history, they invaded culture, they invaded language and bloodlines and the very identity of a nation. And 1,200 years later, we're still talking about them. We're still fascinated by them. We're still trying to understand them. Because deep down, we know the Vikings are part of us, whether we like it or not. That's the truth they never told you. That's the story that changes everything. And now you know. The Vikings came, they saw, they conquered, and they never really left.